The sheriff didn't look at me when he stepped out of his SUV. He looked past me, toward the line of moving trucks crawling through the valley, like a slow funeral procession. Children pressed their faces against backseat windows. Furniture sat wrapped in blue tarps. A grandfather stood beside a pickup truck, holding a rusted birdhouse with both hands as if it weighed 100 pounds. One woman sobbed openly, while another screamed at the deputies, accusing them of destroying innocent families. A television helicopter circled overhead, its blades chopping through the crisp autumn air. Reporters lined the gravel entrance. Cameras pointed at me. Someone yelled, "There he is! That's the man evicting an entire neighborhood." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were false, because they were technically true. 100 families were leaving, every one of them. A cardboard sign lay broken beside the entrance gate. "Welcome to Silver Creek Valley, HOA." Someone had spray-painted one word across it in red: thief. I bent down, picked up the sign, and quietly leaned it against the stone pillar instead of leaving it in the dirt. The sheriff finally walked over. "You ready?" he asked. I stared across 5,000 acres of rolling hills, oak trees, streams, horse pastures and cabins, stretching farther than the eye could see. "My grandfather bought every inch of this valley in 1968, I said. The sheriff nodded. "I know. No one believed me. I know. They called me a liar. I know. They had 3 years to leave." This time he didn't answer, because that part was also true. The countdown hadn't started yesterday. It had started 36 months earlier. The first moving truck eased past us. Inside, a little girl held a stuffed rabbit against the window. She looked straight at me. Not angry, just confused. For a split second, guilt twisted in my stomach. Then I remembered the meeting, the threats, the forged documents, the laughter. The night someone tried to burn my family's century-old barn to the ground. The guilt disappeared. A deputy approached, carrying another folder. "Mr. Carter." I took it. "Last group refused to sign acknowledgement papers." I expected that. "They're demanding another extension." I closed the folder without reading it. They've had enough extensions. Behind us, a man in an expensive golf shirt shoved past 2 deputies. His face was bright red. Harold Whitmore, president of Silver Creek Valley HOA. The man who had spent years telling everyone I was the trespasser. "You can't do this," he shouted. His voice echoed across the valley. "You hear me, Ethan? Those homes belong to these families." I looked at him without saying a word. "They've lived here for 20 years. Still, I stayed silent. "You'll never own this valley," I finally answered. "I already do." His jaw tightened. "You forged those deeds." "No." "You bribed county officials." "No." "You manipulated the court." "No." His breathing became ragged. "Then how?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a faded black and white photograph. It showed my grandfather standing beside the original entrance gate in 1969. Behind him stretched the exact same valley. No houses, no roads, no clubhouse, no HOA, just untouched land. I handed the photo to Harold. His hands trembled before he even looked at it. "You should have accepted my first offer," I said quietly. His face drained of color. The helicopter suddenly shifted direction. Every reporter turned toward the courthouse shuttle, arriving at the entrance. The passenger door opened. A woman stepped out, carrying 2 weathered leather boxes, chained together with evidence seals. The county archivist, the same woman who had disappeared 6 months earlier while searching forgotten property records. Harold saw her. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely terrified. 6 months before the eviction convoy rolled through the valley, I was standing alone on a weathered wooden bridge, listening to the sound of Silver Creek flowing beneath my boots. "My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 38 years old, a licensed land surveyor turned environmental restoration consultant. Most people assume that because I eventually inherited 5,000 acres, I must have grown up wealthy. I didn't. My grandfather owned land. My father inherited debt. There's a difference. When my grandfather, Thomas Carter, passed away, the valley wasn't some luxury estate with a mansion overlooking vineyards. It was a forgotten patchwork of forests, grazing meadows, creeks, and abandoned ranch buildings. For decades, the taxes alone nearly swallowed my family alive. My father worked 2 jobs just to keep the property from being auctioned. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family gathering seemed to end with another conversation about whether we could afford to keep the valley one more year. He refused to sell. Land only leaves a family once, he'd always tell me. After that, you're just borrowing someone else's future. At the time, I thought it was just another old man's saying. Years later, I'd understand exactly what he meant. After Dad died from a heart attack, I inherited the responsibility that had followed 3 generations of my family. Friends thought I'd sell it immediately. Developers had been calling for years, offering numbers with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my bank account. I declined every offer. Not because I was sentimental, because I had a different dream. I wanted to restore the valley. The western ridge had old-growth oaks that hadn't been touched in decades. The wetlands supported migrating birds every spring. There were abandoned cattle trails I planned to convert into public hiking routes through conservation easements. It wasn't about becoming rich. It was about leaving something better than I'd found it. The first few weeks after moving into my grandfather's restored ranch house were almost peaceful. Every morning began with coffee on the porch, while deer crossed the eastern meadow. By afternoon, I'd inspect fences, map erosion along the creek banks, or meet with county conservation officers discussing habitat restoration grants. The nearest town, Ashford, Colorado, was 15 minutes away. Small enough that people still waved from pickup trucks, but large enough to have a courthouse, a hardware store, and a diner where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. At first, the locals welcomed me. "You're Tom Carter's grandson. I remember your granddad. Glad somebody's finally back on that land." The conversations were warm, almost too warm. One afternoon, while eating lunch at Miller's Diner, the waitress hesitated before setting down my burger. "You really moved back to the valley?" "I did." She glanced around before lowering her voice. "You should probably introduce yourself to the HOA." I laughed. "What HOA?" "The Silver Creek Valley HOA." I smiled politely. "I think you've got the wrong property." "No," she replied. "The neighborhood inside your valley." I frowned. "My valley doesn't have a neighborhood." The waitress blinked. Then she gave me a strange look. "I thought everybody knew." That sentence stayed with me the entire drive home. Everybody knew what? Curiosity got the better of me. Instead of taking the ranch road, I followed an old maintenance trail, winding through the northern ridge. A trail I hadn't explored since inheriting the property. About 2 miles in, fresh asphalt replaced the dirt road. I slowed my truck. That wasn't possible. I hadn't approved any paving. A quarter mile later, I saw something even stranger. Decorative streetlights, landscaped flower beds, a stone monument, and beneath it, polished bronze letters that caught the afternoon sun. "Welcome to Silver Creek Valley. Private community. Residents only." Beyond the entrance stretched neat rows of homes, manicured lawns, a clubhouse, tennis courts, and a small lake surrounded by walking paths. More than 100 houses, built in the middle of my family's valley. I stopped the truck. For nearly a minute I couldn't move. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. This couldn't be happening. I reached into the glove compartment, unfolded the certified boundary survey I'd commissioned after inheriting the property, and compared it to the GPS coordinates on my dashboard. There was no mistake. Every single house, every road, every mailbox, every inch of that neighborhood sat squarely inside the legal boundaries of my family's deed. As I stared in disbelief, a white golf cart pulled away from the clubhouse and headed straight toward my truck. The man driving wore a navy polo, embroidered with 4 familiar letters. HOA. He smiled as if I were the one who didn't belong. The golf cart rolled to a stop just a few feet from my truck. The driver didn't ask who I was. He didn't wave. He didn't even look surprised to see a stranger sitting at the entrance. Instead, he folded his sunglasses onto the collar of his navy polo and smiled with the practiced confidence of someone who had repeated the same speech hundreds of times. "Afternoon," he said. "Lost?" I stepped out of my truck, keeping the folded survey map in my hand. "No," his smile didn't change. "This is a private community." I noticed. "Residents only." I noticed that too. He glanced toward the license plate on my truck, then back at me. "If you're looking for a realtor, they're in the clubhouse. I'm not buying." "Then I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." There wasn't an ounce of hostility in his voice. That somehow made it worse. I unfolded the survey. "My name is Ethan Carter." Nothing. "I'm the owner of this valley." His smile finally cracked. For a split second. Then it returned. "Oh," he chuckled. "You're that guy." I frowned. "That guy? We've been hearing about you." "From who?" "The board." He extended a hand. "I'm Daniel Brooks, Property Compliance Manager." I ignored the handshake. "I'd like to know why there are over 100 homes on my land." Daniel sighed dramatically, as though I were wasting his afternoon. "Mr. Carter, I think someone's given you bad information." I held up the survey. "This was certified 3 weeks ago. We have our own surveys." "Then one of them is wrong." "It isn't ours." His confidence was unnerving. Before I could answer, 2 more golf carts approached from opposite directions. One carried a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled silver hair, oversized sunglasses, and a cream-colored blazer that looked absurdly expensive for a Tuesday afternoon. She climbed out slowly, studying me as if evaluating a stain on expensive carpet. "Daniel," she said, "is this our visitor?" "Yes, ma'am." She removed her sunglasses, cold blue eyes, perfect posture, zero warmth. "I'm Patricia Monroe," she said, "Vice President of the Silver Creek Valley HOA." No greeting, no handshake, just a title. "I understand you're claiming ownership of our community." "Our community?" I repeated. She smiled. "No need to become emotional." I almost laughed. "I'm standing on land that's been in my family for nearly 60 years. And yet," she replied calmly, "we've maintained this neighborhood for over 2 decades. That doesn't make it yours. It makes us established." I looked around. Residents had begun gathering. People walking dogs had stopped. Children on bicycles were watching. Front doors opened. Patricia seemed to enjoy the audience. She spoke louder. "You know, Mr. Carter, we occasionally deal with individuals who misunderstand old property lines." "Misunderstand? Outdated deeds, clerical mistakes, family myths." "My deed isn't a myth." She tilted her head. "Neither is our subdivision." The words landed like a slap. I took a slow breath. "I'm not here to argue. I'd simply like copies of the development approvals, building permits, subdivision plats, and recorded easements authorizing construction inside this valley." A flicker crossed her face, barely noticeable. Then it disappeared. "I'm afraid those records aren't available to the public." "They're absolutely public. Our attorney will disagree." Before I could respond, a black SUV pulled into the entrance, county sheriff's office. 2 deputies stepped out. One rested a hand near his belt as they approached. Patricia folded her arms. "I called them." I stared at her. "You called the police?" "Because I asked for public records." Deputy Mark Ellis stopped beside us. "Afternoon, folks." Patricia answered before I could. "This man is refusing to leave private property." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I handed Deputy Ellis my driver's license and the certified survey. "I'm Ethan Carter." He studied the papers carefully. His expression changed. He looked from the survey to the entrance monument, then back to me. "This says you own parcel 18A. "I do," Patricia interrupted. "He doesn't," Ellis frowned. "Ma'am, let me finish." She didn't. "Our attorney already established ownership years ago." "With who?" She hesitated. "That's confidential." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "I don't think this is something we can settle roadside." "I agree," I said. Patricia didn't. "This man is trespassing." Ellis rubbed his forehead. "Ma'am, if his deed is legitimate, he can't trespass on his own property." Silence. The crowd exchanged confused looks. Patricia recovered quickly. "Then his deed is fraudulent. You've seen it?" "No." "Then how do you know?" She had no answer. Instead, she looked directly at Daniel. He immediately pulled out his phone. Within minutes, another black SUV arrived. This one wasn't law enforcement. A law firm logo covered both front doors. Out stepped a sharply dressed attorney carrying a leather briefcase. He walked straight toward me without introducing himself. "Mr. Carter," he said evenly, "my clients are prepared to seek an emergency injunction against you if you continue interfering with this community." "I haven't interfered with anything. You've made false ownership claims." I smiled for the first time all afternoon. "Then filing the lawsuit should be easy." He studied my face. I watched the confidence drain from his eyes as he realized something important. I wasn't bluffing. I actually wanted this fight in court, because if we ended up in front of a judge, someone was going to have to explain how an entire neighborhood had been built inside the legal boundaries of my family's land without my grandfather or my father ever signing a single deed. And judging by the sudden panic spreading across the HOA leaders' faces, they were beginning to realize that explanation might not exist. 3 days after my confrontation at the entrance, a thick envelope arrived at the ranch. No return address. Inside was a single page torn from a county plat book. Across the top Someone had circled a sentence in red ink. See Book 47, page 112. Nothing else. No note. No signature. Just that cryptic reference. I drove to the Ashford County Recorder's office the moment it opened. The clerk behind the counter, a woman named Linda Chavez, recognized my name before I introduced myself. "You're the Carter everyone keeps talking about. I wish people would stop saying that." She smiled faintly. "I'll see what I can find." She disappeared into the records room. 10 minutes later, she returned empty-handed. Book 47 is missing. Missing? It shouldn't be. How does a county record just disappear? She lowered her voice. It doesn't. Before I could ask another question, an older woman stepped out from a hallway, carrying a stack of archive boxes, grey hair tied into a neat bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She stopped when she heard my last question. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "records don't disappear." Linda stiffened. The older woman continued. "They're misfiled." She extended a hand. "My name is Margaret Holloway, county archivist." Something in her tone told me she wasn't speaking by accident. I introduced myself. "I know exactly who you are," she replied. "I've been expecting you." Margaret led me into the archive basement, a place that smelled of dust, old paper, and polished wood. Metal shelves stretched in every direction. Boxes dating back over a century filled the room. She stopped beside a locked cabinet. "This cabinet hasn't been opened in years." She unlocked it with a brass key. Inside sat dozens of leather-bound record books. She pulled out one labeled Book 47. "So it wasn't missing?" "No." "Someone hid it?" She looked at me for several seconds before answering. "I'd say someone preferred people not to find it." She carefully opened the book. Every subdivision recorded in Ashford County during the early 2000s appeared inside. Then she turned to page 112. My stomach tightened. The subdivision approval for Silver Creek Valley Estates was there, but something was wrong. Very wrong. The legal description didn't match my valley, not even close. The subdivision had originally been approved for parcel 22C, nearly 6 miles east of my property. I read it twice, then a third time. "This isn't my land," Margaret nodded. "It never was." "Then how did they build inside my valley?" "I don't know, but someone changed something." She slid another document across the table, a certified survey from 22 years earlier. It matched my grandfather's deed almost perfectly. The property boundaries had never changed, not once. Which meant the county hadn't accidentally moved the lines. Someone else had. Margaret wasn't ready to make accusations. She insisted we verify everything before drawing conclusions. Over the next 2 weeks, we practically lived inside county archives. We compared aerial photographs, tax maps, planning commission minutes, road permits, utility easements, building inspections. The deeper we dug, the stranger the story became. Every permit existed. Every inspection had been approved. Every home had been connected to water and electricity legally. But one document was missing from every single file. The deed granting the developer permission to build on my family's land. It simply wasn't there. Not copied. Not referenced. Not indexed. Nothing. "You can't build a 100-home subdivision without acquiring the land," I said. Margaret nodded. "Exactly. So where's the purchase agreement?" "I've looked everywhere." We searched another 4 days. Still nothing. I hired Rachel Bennett, one of Colorado's most respected real estate attorneys. She listened without interrupting, while Margaret and I spread dozens of documents across the conference table. When we finished, Rachel leaned back in her chair. "I have good news and bad news. Start with the bad. If these homes were built without a valid transfer of title, this case is going to become extraordinarily complicated." "And the good?" She smiled. "The law doesn't magically create ownership because people have lived somewhere a long time." She pointed toward the original Carter deed. "This document is still the foundation of everything." She paused. "But I need one more piece." "What piece?" "The developer." "The company?" "I want to know exactly who built Silver Creek Valley." Margaret slid over another folder. The original developer was Blue Horizon Communities. Rachel opened it. Her expression changed instantly. She looked up at, "That's impossible." "What?" "This company," she turned the file around, "was dissolved almost 18 years before construction on the subdivision supposedly began." The room fell silent. A developer that legally no longer existed had somehow built an entire neighborhood. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized we weren't dealing with a simple land dispute. Someone had built an entire community on forged paperwork and had managed to keep the truth buried for more than 2 decades. Rachel didn't speak for nearly a minute. She simply stared at the articles of dissolution from the Colorado Secretary of State, then at the subdivision file Margaret had uncovered. Finally, she slid both documents across the conference table. These 2 records cannot legally exist together. I leaned forward. Explain. She tapped the first document. Blue Horizon Communities was dissolved in March of 1998. Once a corporation is dissolved, it can't sign new contracts, purchase land, or develop subdivisions unless it's legally reinstated. She tapped the second file. According to this, Blue Horizon submitted the final development paperwork in August of 2001. 3 years later. Exactly. So someone revived the company? Rachel shook her head. I already checked. They never did. Margaret quietly removed another folder from her briefcase. I think you'll want to see this. Inside was a faded microfilm printout she had requested from the state archives. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a survey. It was a set of planning commission meeting minutes from 25 years earlier. A paragraph had been highlighted. The commission tabled the Silver Creek Valley Estates proposal after the applicant failed to provide proof of land ownership. My pulse quickened. They were rejected. Rachel nodded slowly. Keep reading. The next page contained another entry, dated 6 months later. Application withdrawn by applicant. There it was. Official proof that the original subdivision proposal had never been approved. Yet somehow, 100 homes had still been built. The following morning, Rachel filed a civil action seeking a judicial declaration confirming my ownership of the entire valley, along with an order invalidating every recorded instrument tied to the subdivision. The lawsuit named far more than the HOA. It included the original title company, 2 engineering firms, a surveying contractor, the developer's successor entity, and 3 unknown defendants identified only as John Doe 13, pending further investigation. By lunchtime, every local news station was covering the story. Headlines flashed across television screens. Homeowners face uncertainty in massive land dispute. Who really owns Silver Creek Valley? Within hours, my phone was flooded with messages. Some were supportive, others weren't. One voicemail stood out. You think you're some hero? A man's voice growled. You'll regret dragging families into this. Then he hung up. That night, another message arrived. This one contained only an address, no explanation. Rachel insisted we didn't go alone. The next afternoon, she, Margaret, Sheriff Daniel Harper and I drove to an abandoned storage facility just outside Ashford. Unit 214 had been rented decades earlier. The current owner had recently purchased the property at auction after years of unpaid rent. He'd found old boxes inside and, after seeing the news, contacted Rachel. The lock had already been cut. Dust filled the air as we stepped inside. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Broken drafting tables filled another. Most of the paperwork had rotted away, but one fireproof safe remained intact. The auction owner handed Rachel a small envelope. This was taped underneath. Inside was the combination. The safe clicked open. Rachel carefully pulled out a stack of binders. Every spine carried the same handwritten label, Silver Creek Valley Project. My heart pounded. The first binder contained architectural drawings. The second held engineering reports. The third stopped us cold. Rachel slowly turned the first page. It was a contract, not between the developer and my grandfather, between the developer and Harold Whitmore. Years before becoming HOA president, at the bottom of the page was a handwritten note. Acquire signatures later if Carter refuses. No signature from my grandfather. No signature from my father. Only Harold's initials. Rachel looked at me. This changes everything. Before I could answer, Sheriff Harper lifted another folder from the safe. Everyone needs to see this. It contained internal correspondence between project executives. One memo read, "Do not contact Thomas Carter directly. Continue construction while title issues remain unresolved. By the time litigation begins, occupancy will create leverage for settlement." Silence filled the room. They had known from the very beginning. The entire project had been built while fully aware they did not own the land. Families had unknowingly purchased homes, caught inside a scheme designed to pressure my family into selling. Rachel carefully photographed every page. This isn't just a civil case anymore. Sheriff Harper nodded. No. He closed the binder. This is evidence of fraud. Word spread faster than any of us expected. By the next morning, HOA board members were resigning one after another. Daniel Brooks disappeared. Patricia Monroe stopped answering calls. But Harold Whitmore did something none of us anticipated. He held a televised community meeting inside the clubhouse. Standing before frightened homeowners, he pointed directly into the cameras. Ethan Carter is trying to make 100 American families homeless. Then he held up a copy of my lawsuit. If he wins, your children lose everything. The room erupted in applause. Not because they hated me, because they believed him. Watching from Rachel's office, I felt something tighten in my chest. Those families still didn't know the truth. They thought I had started this. They had no idea they had been victims from the day they bought their homes. Rachel muted the television. They're trying to turn public opinion before trial. I stared at Harold's face frozen on the screen. No, I said quietly. He's trying to make sure those homeowners never ask the one question that will destroy him. Rachel looked at me. What question? I didn't take my eyes off the television. Why did he never tell them that he knew the land was never his to sell? Outside her office window, reporters were already gathering on the courthouse steps. The trial date had finally been set. In less than 3 weeks, every secret buried beneath Silver Creek Valley would be dragged into open court. 3 weeks later, I walked through the front doors of the Ashford County Courthouse before sunrise. The marble hallways echoed with hurried footsteps and hushed conversations. Television crews had already claimed every spot on the courthouse lawn. Satellite trucks lined the street. By 8 o'clock, people were standing shoulder to shoulder outside the courtroom, hoping to witness what local reporters were calling the largest property dispute in county history. I wasn't nervous. I was exhausted. 3 years of negotiations, 6 months of investigations, thousands of pages of documents. It had all led to this room. Rachel adjusted the stack of trial binders in front of her. Remember, she said quietly, today isn't about proving you're a good man. I know. It's about proving the law. I nodded. Across the aisle, Harold Whitmore sat with Patricia Monroe and 3 attorneys from one of Denver's largest law firms. Harold looked polished as always, dressed in a charcoal suit with a silver tie. If someone had walked into the courtroom without knowing the story, they would have assumed he was the respectable businessman. But I had seen the notes inside that safe. I knew who he really was. At exactly 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors closed. Everyone stood. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered without ceremony. She was in her late 60s, known throughout Colorado for having little patience for theatrics. After everyone was seated, she looked over the packed courtroom. I understand emotions are high, she began, but this courtroom operates on evidence, not headlines. Her gaze swept across both legal teams. If anyone intends to perform for the cameras, I suggest you reconsider. The room fell completely silent. Harold's lead attorney, Michael Reeves, delivered the opening statement first. He didn't deny the families lived in the valley. He embraced it. For more than 20 years, he told the court, these homeowners have invested their savings, raised children, paid taxes, maintained infrastructure, and relied upon government approvals. Equity matters. Stability matters. Mr. Carter now seeks to erase an entire community. Several homeowners quietly nodded. Rachel remained expressionless. When it was her turn, she stood without carrying a single note to the podium. This case, she said calmly, is not about whether these families deserve sympathy. She paused. They do. Several jurors leaned forward. It is about whether sympathy can replace ownership. She walked toward the evidence screen. The defendants would like this court to believe that 20 years of occupation somehow erased recorded title. Another pause. The law has never worked that way. She displayed my grandfather's original deed, then the certified surveys, then the planning commission minutes Margaret had discovered. Each document built upon the last, like pieces of an unavoidable puzzle. No dramatic music, no raised voices, just facts, one after another. By lunchtime, the atmosphere inside the courtroom had changed. The confidence on the HOA's side was fading. Then came Harold's testimony. He walked to the witness stand with steady steps and took the oath. Michael Reeves smiled reassuringly. Mr. Whitmore, did you ever intentionally mislead homeowners? No. Did you believe the subdivision was legally developed? Absolutely. Were you acting in good faith? I was. Rachel didn't move. She simply waited until Reeves finished. Then she approached the witness stand carrying a thin blue folder. Mr. Whitmore, she began, you testified under oath that you always believed the subdivision was lawful. Correct. She handed him a document. Please identify Exhibit 42. Harold glanced at it. I don't recognize it. Rachel smiled politely. You don't? No. She turned toward the judge. Your Honor, Exhibit 42 was recovered from a fireproof safe rented in Mr. Whitmore's name. Harold's attorney immediately stood. Objection. Foundation. Rachel calmly produced the rental agreement, then surveillance records, then the auction paperwork. Judge Brooks reviewed them carefully. Objection overruled. Rachel faced Harold again. Would you like to read the handwritten note at the bottom of the page? Harold hesitated. I can't make it out. Rachel enlarged the document on the courtroom screen. Every word became visible. Acquire signatures later if Carter refuses. The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear someone in the gallery inhale sharply. Rachel took another step. Mr. Whitmore. Whose handwriting is that? Harold swallowed. I don't know. Rachel opened another binder. I thought you might say that. She displayed a series of HOA board meeting notes, then old bank authorization forms, then personal letters Harold had written years earlier. A forensic handwriting expert took the stand. After comparing more than 50 known samples, she delivered her conclusion. The probability that these writings came from anyone other than Mr. Whitmore is extraordinarily low. Harold's face turned pale. His attorney whispered urgently into his ear. Rachel wasn't finished. She called Margaret Holloway. The county archivist carefully explained how the original subdivision application had been rejected because the developer failed to prove ownership of my family's land. She walked the court through the records, the missing deed, the dissolved corporation, and the timeline. Every answer was calm, precise, and supported by documents. Then Sheriff Daniel Harper testified about the storage unit and the recovery of the project files. Finally, Rachel played the last card. She projected an internal memorandum recovered from the safe. Continue construction while title issues remain unresolved. Occupancy will create leverage for settlement. The jurors read it in complete silence. Judge Brooks removed her glasses. She looked directly at Harold. Mr. Whitmore. Her voice was measured, almost unnervingly calm. Before this court proceeds any further, I have one question. Harold looked up. She held the memorandum in her hand. If you believed this land belonged to the developer, why were you discussing obtaining the Carter family's signatures after construction had already begun? For the first time since the trial started, Harold had no answer. He simply stared at the document, then at the jurors, then at his own attorney. The silence lasted nearly 30 seconds. His lawyer rose slowly. Your Honor, he cleared his throat. My client wishes to amend portions of his testimony. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Judge Brooks looked at the clock, then back at counsel. We will take a 15-minute recess. She struck the gavel. As everyone stood, Rachel leaned toward me and whispered just 4 words. He's about to break. The 15-minute recess stretched into nearly an hour. No one left. The courtroom buzzed with whispered theories, while reporters hurried in and out, relaying updates to cameras stationed on the courthouse lawn. Homeowners sat in uneasy silence. Some stared at the floor. Others avoided looking at me altogether. When the bailiff finally announced the court was back in session, the room fell silent again. Harold Whitmore returned, looking like a different man. The expensive suit was the same. The confidence wasn't. He avoided eye contact with the gallery, with the judge, and especially with the homeowners who had trusted him for years. Judge Eleanor Brooks settled into her chair. Mr. Reeves, she said, looking at Harold's attorney, I understand your client wishes to amend his testimony. Reeves stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. He looked genuinely defeated. My client wishes to correct several statements made under oath. Harold swallowed hard before speaking into the microphone. I wasn't completely truthful. The words landed like a hammer. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Someone behind me whispered, Oh my God. Harold kept his eyes fixed on the witness stand. When Blue Horizon couldn't obtain the Carter property, they approached me. Rachel remained perfectly still. Judge Brooks leaned forward. For what purpose? To help keep the project alive. Explain. Harold closed his eyes for a moment. They believed, once enough homes were occupied, the Carter family would eventually give up and sell. A stunned silence spread through the courtroom. They told me, Harold continued, his voice shaking, that no judge would ever force 100 families to leave. My chest tightened. Not because I was surprised, because hearing the plan spoken aloud somehow made it worse. Judge Brooks asked the next question. Were you aware that construction began without a valid deed from the Carter family? Yes. Were the homeowners informed? No. Did you ever disclose the title dispute before they purchased their homes? Harold's shoulders slumped. No. The courtroom erupted. Several homeowners stood at once. "You lied to us." "What do you mean you knew?" "My retirement savings." The bailiff immediately called for order. Judge Brooks struck the gavel twice. "If there is another interruption, I will clear this courtroom." Gradually, the room settled, but the damage had already been done. For the first time, those families understood they hadn't been fighting me. They had been fighting for the man who had deceived them. The defense rested shortly afterward. There was very little left to argue. Rachel delivered the closing argument with the same quiet confidence she'd shown throughout the trial. "This case has never been about punishing innocent homeowners," she said. "They were victims." She paused long enough for the words to sink in. "The evidence shows they purchased homes believing every legal requirement had been satisfied. They relied upon professionals, developers, title companies, and an HOA leadership that knew the truth." She turned toward me. "My client did not create this tragedy." Then she looked directly at Judge Brooks. "He inherited it." Judge Brooks recessed for 2 hours to review the record. Those were the longest 2 hours of my life. I stood alone outside the courthouse, beneath an old oak tree my grandfather had once pointed out to me when I was a child. "Trees outlive arguments," he'd said. I never understood that until then. Rachel eventually joined me. "You okay?" "I don't know." She nodded. "Whatever happens, you fought the right fight." Before I could answer, the courthouse bell rang. The verdict was ready. Everyone rose as Judge Brooks returned. She opened a thick folder. "This court has reviewed the deeds, surveys, corporate records, planning documents, witness testimony, and exhibits." She looked around the packed courtroom. "The evidence overwhelmingly establishes that title to the 5,000-acre Carter Valley has remained continuously vested in the Carter family." She turned another page. "The subdivision known as Silver Creek Valley was developed without a lawful conveyance of ownership." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. "Accordingly," she paused, "this court enters judgment, declaring Ethan Carter the lawful owner of the property." I closed my eyes. Not in celebration, in relief. Judge Brooks continued. "However, the court also recognizes that the homeowners purchased these properties without knowledge of the underlying fraud." She ordered that every affected homeowner retain the right to pursue damages against the developer's successor entities, the title insurer, responsible professionals, and any individuals found liable for fraudulent conduct. She also referred the matter to state prosecutors for potential criminal investigation into fraud, forgery, and perjury. Then came the final order. The courtroom held its breath. Mr. Carter previously offered multiple relocation extensions over a period exceeding 3 years. She looked directly at me. "The court finds those efforts were made in good faith." Then she addressed the homeowners. "Because no lawful ownership interest exists in the occupied parcels, the remaining occupants shall vacate the property in accordance with the previously approved court-supervised relocation schedule." No one cheered. No one celebrated. There was only silence. Heavy, painful, real. As people slowly filed out, an elderly man approached me. I recognized him. George Harlan. He had lived in the valley since the first homes were built. His eyes were red. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." He held out his hand. "I called you a thief." I shook it. "You were lied to." He nodded. "My wife died believing this place was ours." I didn't know what to say. After a long pause, I answered honestly, "I wish it had been." He squeezed my hand once, before walking away. Outside, reporters rushed toward me. Microphones filled the air. "Mr. Carter, do you feel victorious?" I looked back at the courthouse steps, where dozens of families were comforting one another. Then I answered the only way I could. "There are no winners here." I paused. "There are only people finally learning the truth." Nearly a year has passed since the court's decision, and Carter Valley looks different than it ever has in my lifetime. The empty streets where the subdivision once stood are gradually being transformed. Some roads have been removed, native grasses have returned to the hillsides, and restoration crews are rebuilding wetlands that were buried beneath concrete decades ago. A portion of the valley is now protected under a permanent conservation easement, ensuring it can never again become the center of another reckless development. As for the families who once lived there, many reached settlements with the companies and individuals responsible for the fraud. I truly hope they found peace, because they were never my enemies. They were victims of promises built on lies. This experience taught me something I'll never forget. Ownership isn't just about what's written on paper. It's about protecting what's right, even when standing alone feels impossible. If you know the truth, don't let intimidation, public opinion, or powerful people convince you to abandon it. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever dealt with an HOA dispute, a property conflict, or a situation where someone tried to take what was rightfully yours, I'd genuinely love to hear your story. What would you have done if you had discovered an entire neighborhood built on land your family legally owned? If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real estate and HOA drama. Your support helps this channel continue bringing you gripping stories like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself, stand up for what's right, and remember, the truth has a way of finding daylight, no matter how deeply it's buried.